Hey everybody, this is Mike Szabo, bass trombonist with the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra in Melbourne, Australia. Coming to you today from my home studio, where I'm really excited to share with you an instrument that I just bought, which is a 1926 Conn 70H, otherwise known as the Fuchs model. This instrument is probably widely considered to be the progenitor of the modern bass trombone. When it was made, it was so ahead of its time that very few instruments were produced. The man whose idea it was to make this instrument was a man called Robert Fuchs. He played bass trombone with the Chicago Grand Opera over 100 years ago. He went to the Conn factory and designed with them this instrument. Now, the reason it was so ahead of its time is because simply that it was much larger than bass trombones were made in those days. The reasons, I'll go through it very quickly. The specifications, I'm sort of a trombone geek, so this stuff really interests me. The slide itself is 0.562 inches, which is the modern bass trombone bore size. In those days, bass trombones would have had a bore size of what is today a tenor trombone slide bore. Also, this section up through the back bow, called the J bend, is much larger than what would have been produced at the time. The throat and the flare of the bell is much larger than what would have been made at the time, very similar to a Bach bass trombone today. And the size of the bell is a modern 9.5 inches, or very close to it. Other notable things about this horn: it has what's known as tuning in the slide. So instead of a tuning slide being back here, like what it is on almost all modern instruments, the tuning slide is actually right here on the hand slide. Other interesting things to note are the valve tubing, which is all hand bent, is a very large 0.605 inches, whereas the modern tubes you get when you buy a bass trombone today would be 0.95 inches. So all in all, this is a remarkable instrument in that it was made over 100 years ago, this particular instrument from 1926. Other interesting things about this horn: it is a special order. If you look at the serial number under the cork barrel, it has a little star underneath the serial number, which denotes something special about it. And in this case, it's the alloy that the trombone's made out of. The Fuchs model, as it normally was in those days, the very few that survive today, almost all of them are red brass, which is a very sort of reddish coppery colored brass, which I personally don't prefer to play on. But this model has a yellow brass slide, yellow brass valve tubing, and then gold brass on the J bend and the bell. So it's very unusual. Conn really didn't make almost any instruments with a gold brass bell, so this is a very highly unusual instrument. Other interesting things to note: in those days, you wouldn't have had a modern linkage for the valve. You would have just had a leather thong that would come in. You would wrap it around your thumb and work the valve that way. Also, there wouldn't have been a nut here to attach the slide like on a modern instrument. It would have been what's called a friction fit, which is sort of a large piece that just would slide in, and you would tighten it that way. So this slide itself also has been rebuilt most recently by Ben Hansen up in Seattle, and he did a great job. So all in all, it's pretty much ready to go. There's no problems with it. The bell section is in original condition, and remarkably so. There's never been any really big bad dents on the bell, etc. So I'm going to do a bit of playing on it now. We're going to talk about a bit of Hungarian March, and I'll be back to you in a moment. I absolutely love playing on vintage instruments in the orchestra. And in my opinion, one of the best composers to do that with is Hector Berlioz. He was such a pioneer in his writing for trombones. He wrote melodically, and he wasn't afraid to write fast notes. And one of the pieces that really features that is the Hungarian March. The history of this piece goes back to 1846, when Berlioz took a trip to Budapest to do some concerts promoting his music. And in those days, it was the custom to write a piece in that country's folk music when you visited there. And that's what he did, and the result of which was this piece, the Hungarian March. Apparently, it was a rousing success. There was a massive amount of applause, and I'd like to think that the trombone writing had something to do with that. Let's have a listen. So, how does this old Conn Fuchs model play? In a word, it's outstanding. It takes the best parts of a Conn, which is the responsiveness and the color of the sound, and brings it to the best parts of a Bach, which are the depth and the width and the core of sound, and it somehow combines those two things which should be at opposite ends of the ballpark, right, into one place. In fact, the story goes when old man Bach was designing his Model 50 bass trombone, back in the 1930s, he used one of these horns as a template. So you can sort of feel that when you play this. It's sort of got this DNA of a Bach underneath the skin of a Conn, and it's a really interesting combination. The soft register is lyrical and easy. The high register is beautiful. And the low range is fat. It really is a horn that will do everything for you. Now, the problem is getting your hands on one. So if you can wait for another 5 or 10 years until the next one comes up for sale, maybe you can get lucky. Anyway, thanks for joining me. I really hope you like this video. Please like it, and if you like my channel and want to see more of what I do, please subscribe also. Cheers.